Thank you, Richard, for being here. Welcome to Charlotte officially. I'm Carlos Salum, and this is a dream that I dreamt 25 years ago when I saw Richard in an edition of Fortune magazine, he tells me, in Newport, Rhode Island.
The art's there, the photo stayed.
And the article called him an intellectual hedonist. And I said, that's the guy I need to meet. It took me 25 years to be sitting on the same stage with him, but all along I thought, this is a person who has found how to live life to its fullest, especially because he had to reinvent himself. So that was at the personal level. Also at the personal level, what intrigued me was that since I had lived 23 years under dictatorships where you couldn't speak your mind, you couldn't really be yourself, you were told what to do, what to say, or you were penalized in very severe ways, in the most dramatic ways. And I came to America to try to revert that and have a chance to have a seat at the table. The fact that Richard was talking about understanding yourself if you want to make any change of any kind, and also that understanding is power, that if you really ask questions rather than get digested dogma and act on it, you have a better chance because you have perhaps choice, alternatives. So that's what I thought that I would like to share with people, and we had a chance in Venice, in Italy. It might have not been the right environment because there were Swiss bankers that came and also sub-billionaires, people with lots of money who actually wanted to find a way to invest differently. But that's when I discovered the third thing that Richard would bring to my life and I wanted to share with you, that is provocation, that he provoked them. And he's a provocateur extraordinaire, and he can really help us look at things from a different angle. So I think that that's the experience that I wanted to share, and I'm sure that he will take it to the nth degree. One last thing that I want to share with you is that Richard does not have Tourette's.
I'm not making fun of anybody who has Tourette's. It's just that my language sometimes goes a little off. So I apologize in advance for my language. If I listen to the introduction, I don't talk to people. I don't give talks that much. I usually just say no, because I don't really care about doing that. And I'm not on the circuit, and this sounds like I'm going to give one of those inspirational speeches to change. I don't really care about your lives so much. And this is not an inspiration, and I'm not selling a book that does that. This is just not what I do. Carlos has been bugging me to do this, and I decided that I was just 75 last week. And, well, but wait, no, why you shouldn't, you clap and you die. You have it. So I was obsessed with becoming 75. I thought about it for a year and a half. 75, that's so fucking old. What am I going to do? How is my mind? What does 75 mean? And it became symbolic of have I done anything? Do I have any thoughts? How's my mind? Am I remembering things? And, well, that wasn't the problem. My memory has gotten better, but it's just gotten better in the last 3 or 4 years. It's shockingly a lot, but it scares me like it's a flame-out memory because I'm remembering everything. And not skip memory. I'm remembering yesterday. I'm remembering everything. So that's nice. But I got obsessed and I was thinking, well, how do I celebrate? My wife gave me a surprise 50th and 65th. She says she's not touching another party. She's not going to do it. She hates it. She doesn't like parties. She wasn't going to do that. So I knew I wasn't going to have a party. So I decided that, and I made, of course, a total numerical error, but I decided to celebrate not my birthday, but the whole year of being 75. Well, but it's actually the year of being 76, so it's a whole mathematical error by 1 year. just the way there was no year zero, because there was no concept of zero. So in the 6th century, a monk by the name of Dennis the Little was told to invent the calendar. Some of you know this. He invented the calendar, went backwards, and he forgot the year zero because he never knew about zero. Zero was used a little bit by the Mayans and a little bit by the Egyptians, and it really didn't come into being until about the 14th or 13th century in the Arabic world, so there was no zero. So it started wrong. But it started wrong for other reasons. It started wrong because they knew that when Herod died, which was 4 years before what he had as year 1 or year 0 or something, and Herod was alive when Christ was supposed to be born, so they screwed that up completely. So that's why some people, I mean, loonies, and there's probably some in the room here that believe the world started in 4004 BC. Those 4 years is Herod gave us those 4 years because he died 4 years before Christ was born, and they had to have them both alive at the same time, which is madness of a high order. But then there's no leap years every 100 years, and every 1,000 years we lose a day, and we think all the numbers are just wrong. The year repeats. My birthday will be the same day in 28 years. Every 28 years, the calendar repeats. There's nothing that's really handed to us from the heavens about all these numbers that we believe in. We believe in a lot of two things, black and white, male and female, vertebrates and invertebrates. But there's many other things between vertebrates and invertebrates. It's not just two things. We like to have things neatly in twos. Of course, some people in religious ways, like to have things in threes. Young like to have things in fours. We think the decimal is about fives and hand, so we have tens. Sevens. We have 7 days in the week. Means nothing. 52 weeks in a year, doesn't divide into it equally. There's nothing we do that makes any sense whatsoever. Nothing, and yet we go along like this has some great meaning for us. In 1899, the front page of the New York Times had a story, a correct story, that the following year would be the end of the 19th century. Because the 20th century begins in 1901. Front page of the New York Times. 100 years later, we celebrated it the wrong day. In 100 years, we made a mistake. That's where we came in that 100 years. I was born in 1935. Well, I looked up some of this because I'm very nervous about disappointing Carlos. I never use notes when I give speeches. I just talk. But I don't want to disappoint Carlos. So in my desire not to disappoint, I wanted to look up when I was born, because you can take anything as a way of beginning. I think everything connects with everything. When I was born, but it puts things someplace. When I was born, nylon was invented, 1935. It was nylon. And Elvis Presley was born that year. And he played, when we came in, some music. That has a special story for me. I didn't ask him to play that. But I was asked on a stage someplace about a year ago by whose name, I do forget his name. He used to write the innovation column for Business Week, that section of the paper. I thought you might know. Yeah, got it, Nussbaum. He interviewed me on the stage, and he said, well, who do you think you are? A little provocatively. And right then and there, I said, I think I am a dance. I am the tango. And I said, the tango is amazing. It's an amazing dance. It's violent, but it's very architectural. It's very sensuous and erotic. The people hardly touch. There's order to it, but then there's freedom about what you do. It's an extraordinary dance, and I am both partners. I am both partners. I am ignorance and intelligence. I am success and failure. I am curiosity and stupidity. I'm both partners dancing this dance of hardly touching, and that's how I get through life. And he played the tango coming in. Well, I have news for you. Carlos Gardel invented the tango, and he died in 1935. He died the year I was born. And he told me he died in an airplane crash. Excuse me. Paperback books, the Penguin Books was invented in 1935. Persia turned into Iran in 1935. Now, 1935 is not so long ago. I mean, it's my lifetime. It's not really so long ago. And yet it's really quite a different world. And there's other things that aren't so long ago that we don't even learn anything about. I follow, I'll tell you some of the reasons later, but I follow earthquakes a lot. I have a lot of threads. I think that's the lingo that people talk about. They use now, threads. It's just interests. But threads, I have threads in my life, and one thread is earthquakes. We just had an earthquake. Your hometown was in San Diego. I don't mean to keep on pointing at you, but I remembered your hometown was San Diego. And they had an earthquake in Mexicali, which didn't hit San Diego too hard at all. But I just looked this morning before I left home, and in the past week, up until when I left home for the airport, there was 820 aftershocks, big enough to be recorded, 2 plus 3. That's a lot. Usually there's about 8 or 9 aftershocks. 820. Now, why is that interesting? It's interesting because I didn't read that any place in the newspaper. And that's a fascinating thing. In fact, natural disasters are pretty fascinating things. We can't control them, but we spit it in and spit it out, the news. Nothing has sticky on it. It's no longer violent enough to have sticky on it. We don't understand it in context. We don't remember it. We don't remember that right now, there's a big volcano going off in Iceland. Quite a big one. If you follow volcanoes, which I do, there's a big one going off there, and somebody sent me a bunch of photographs of it. And I said, oh my God, how did you know that I loved volcanoes? Some Facebook person, I don't do this, but I go on because it bings and I see the picture. And I can't type. I just told somebody I can't. I go bing, bing, bing. And I do it in all caps. All my emails are in all caps because it's easier than I just push the button and it stays there. Anyway, it showed me some extraordinary pictures of this volcano going off in Iceland. And it's a series going off. And I said, is it near Laki, L-A-K-I? And he said, no, it's not. It's near those 2 waterfalls that are on the wave. And I said, I know those waterfalls. So I knew where it was. And, but it made me think of Laki, because in 1783, there was all volcanoes are not made the same. We see volcanoes that have stuff coming out of them in Hawaii and it makes new land, right? That's one kind. But the volcano Laki that went off in 1783, which I don't think many people here know about, sent up a plume of pumice, very fine pumice, into the atmosphere, created one of those horrible summerless years and killed crops for a season in Europe, and kept on going down across Europe to the Nile Valley. And it hung over the Nile Valley. The weather conditions made it hang over the Nile Valley. And in Egypt, it is estimated, for 3 years it hung there, 1 million people died of starvation. Now, why don't we learn some of this in school? Why don't we understand in context that there are things that happen that put things into perspective? It puts global warming into perspective. It puts all the natural disasters that keep on happening everywhere in perspective. We have to know how to react to them, but we have to know them to react to them. We have to understand their patterns, and we have to understand that they're not created equal. Get back and forth to the word understanding. By the way, we know about Laki because when I came across France, Benjamin Franklin, who was in Paris at the time, wrote about it. Benjamin Franklin is something else. And that's a whole talk in itself. What a guy, I would like to be Benjamin Franklin. He's extraordinary, extraordinary. So I've never had a prop. I've never used a prop on stage. So I thought I would use a prop because a couple days ago, I realized something. I think there's probably hardly a person here who hasn't eaten a banana. And I've always looked at it as the ultimate fruit, because you can eat it anywhere in the world. It's clean. You open it, and it's clean inside. And it's very nourishing, and we all think we are keeping a healthy body because of the potassium that it supposedly has more than anything else. It doesn't have more than anything else. It just has some, and we recognize potassium in the banana. And I lived in the jungle of Guatemala for 6 months, and I mapped the third of Tikal when I was young, the first season there, and we had banana trees. And I have miniature banana trees in one of my 2 greenhouses, and they bloom. They had some bananas this year. I'd take them out in the summer and keep them in there in the winter. And so I really do like bananas. Bananas are rather interesting. And for my whole life, I've peeled a banana this way, the way you take it off of a tree. And often it doesn't work that way, and you have to go like that. Has anybody ever done that? Where you take a knife and you cut it? Well, I got to tell you, the easy way to peel a banana is the other way, the opposite way. And I never peeled a banana that way until last week. My whole life, I've eaten bananas. And I've peeled them the hardest way. And nobody ever taught me to turn it upside down. So I try to live my life turning everything upside down. If there's a valid opposite, well, let's try it. I'm very self-centered and very selfish, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that I direct my energy and my interests to something I know a little bit about, which is myself. I don't know anything about anybody in this room, and I can't fool myself into thinking I do. I just don't. I don't know what you're thinking. Whether this guy, why did I come? I have to go to the bathroom. It's not worth it. He looks better in his picture. I don't know what anybody's thinking. So I decided to really limit my interests to those things that interested me, not that interested others or to change others, but that I knew I was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And so if I could make it understandable to myself, I knew some other people would understand it too, so be it. And if they didn't, then they didn't. And I haven't based my life on the success of other people understanding me. And so when some of you know that I started a conference called TED, well, I started because I wanted to talk to some people who were smarter than I. I wanted not to be bored, so I told them I couldn't talk long. I can't be sold to, so they can't sell anything from the stage. I want to be entertained, so I had Herbie Hancock and Yo-Yo Ma and people like that come, and David Blaine and all kinds of magicians. I love magic. And anything I love, why not? Because everything is interesting. It's all interesting if you can see a pattern in it. If something about it, you can connect to something else and see a pattern. When I was in high school, I did okay. There was a lot of smarter people in my high school, public high school. By the way, I have no family money. Parents on both sides didn't go to college. One was a kosher butcher and the other side cigar maker. So it's not, I don't have fancy, my feet are not in fancy boots. But we were expected to, if we talked at the dinner table, we had to know what we were saying or we were sent away to look it up. And that's not a bad discipline. And I look up things instantly now. If I'm reading a newspaper or anything and it's something that's interesting and I don't understand it, I stop and I look it up instantly. And I do that with magazines that I scan and that I underline and do things like that. I think that's, and we can do it so much easier now. It's so joyful, this notion of flying through this world of information and connection and understanding that we never had before. I mean, it is like being a pig in shit. It is fantastic to feel this and to know we're just scraping the bottom of this wonderment of curiosity that instantly can create maps. I love maps. Create maps of things, patterns. One of the foibles of maps and cartographers are that they're taught that the more you put on a map, the better the map is. Of course, they're absolutely wrong. The less you put on, the better it is, so you can see some clear patterns. Like most everything else, it's wrong. When I went to high school, I was told 3 great lies, and that's in that little book there. I'm not trying to sell that book. I'm just telling you it's in that book. The book was done. I can't write, so I did it in 2 long sessions where I talked into a tape recorder, had it transcribed, I edited it, then I spec'd the type, sent it to somebody who could do it in the computer. They sent me back the sheets. I had sheets cut to a double-page spread. I cut it with kindergarten scissors, put it down with Scotch tape, had them straighten it out, went to the press, spec'd the color on the press. I had Sappy Paper give me enough paper free, because I know people, for 10,000 books, and that's the book. There was no publisher, there was no agent, there was no whatever else you have. Editor, so that's why it's probably not so clean some places. It's just me talking. It's a conversation. It's not written. And I love that book. I've done 82 books. That's one of the 4 I really love. The rest are not that good. Well, that's the way it is. You try to do good work, but a lot of it doesn't, it's just not as good as you want it to be. You really, each time you try to do good things. I do try, but if I really tried to make it perfect, I'd be an academician and I would never publish anything. I just try to get on to the next thing, because there's so many ideas of things that I don't understand that are so interesting. I lived in North Carolina for 2 years in 1962-64, and I taught it. I was an assistant professor of architecture. I was 26, and I was told to come down here by Louis Kahn, the architect. He said, I want you to teach for 2 years. Or he actually said, teach for a year, it's good for you. He and I were friendly. And I came down here, and the first 2 books I did, I had a little plan for my life that I was going to do a book a year. I actually have done a little bit more than a book a year. But the first 2 books I did those 2 years that I was here. And I did a book on Lou Kahn. It was the first book ever done on Louis Kahn. Some of you might not know who he is. The people who know who he is know he's the architect's architect. People who don't know who he is, that's another talk or something you look up sometime. But he was an extraordinary man, not particularly nice man, but an extraordinary man and the best teacher that I'll ever have. And he was a great teacher because he allowed me to be more of myself. Some of you might have seen that film that was up for an Academy Award called My Architect. And that was quite a good film done by his illegitimate son, Nathaniel. Anyway, I realized that the kids in class, and this is a long time ago, I mentioned the word, I was very cocky at 26. I'm mellow today. Mellow. I was not mellow. And I was very edgy and very self-righteous and thought I was smart. And a number of the students didn't know what I was talking about when I used the word Helsinki. They said, what is a Helsinki? And I realized they didn't know much about geography. And I said, okay, this is a basic design course, but we're going to learn a little bit about geography. So I picked out 50 cities in the world, and I did maps of those cities out of clay, plasticine, all to the same scale. We did gross form maps, all to the same scale. It was astonishing. I mean, I thought it was an interesting exercise, but I realized that Rome was this big, Paris was that big. Downtown Philadelphia was that big, but so was Versailles, and so was Venice. I didn't know the relative size of anything. We printed 1,200 copies, sent a few around. In about 8 to 10 weeks, they were gone all over the world. The cover of a Norwegian architectural magazine, the frontispiece of Architecture d'Aujourd'hui, the fancy French architectural magazine. Yale University took the plates in their architecture school, mounted them, and had them up as an exhibit for about 25 years. Now, I thought, there must be lots of people who have done this. After all, it's not a very bright idea. Duh, right? I made it the same scale because it was convenient. But it turned out that it was a revelation. That knowing the size of something is not trivial. It's actually really, really quite interesting. that how we measure things and what sizes of things are really, and to understand them and use them in your vocabulary is interesting. The biggest project I'm working on now is called 1920-21, and it's based on an idea of looking at 19 of the largest cities of the world that will have more than 20 million people in the 21st century. That's a clever title, 1920-21. It's not necessarily about those cities, and I don't even care what those cities are. That's why I say it's 19 of the cities. I'm going to choose probably the 15 biggest today and then 4 or so others that I like. Because that's not the issue. The issue is no two cities in the world do their maps to the same scale or with the same legends, ask the same questions, or have any methodology for showing their borders. And you can say, so what? Well, I think it probably doesn't affect everybody. But it's one of those basic, it would be if you and I were talking, and you were talking in Finnish, and I was talking English, and you wouldn't understand a word I'm saying, and I don't understand a word you're saying. In order to understand something about success and failure in cities, about our world, which is 51% going on 70% urban livers, shouldn't you understand the urbanized world? It's not saying every city is a wonderful city, or how are we going to fix cities? You can't fix them if you don't understand them. We've done a little deep dive study on Tokyo and New York, and there are 6 or 7 justifiable ways of drawing the border around New York City. Of course, you can always say the political boundaries, right? But then there's 6 or 7 other ways of showing where the lights at night are, where the counties are that you're part of, the SMA, used to be SMSA, Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area. There's there's legitimate ways of how you draw the borders around a city. Well, if you do that, you can get in Tokyo a population, which is considered by all authorities as being the largest city in the world, you can get everything from 25 to 65 million population. We say, well, so what? We know it's the biggest city in the world. Let's say you wanted to locate something someplace. You want to understand a population, the growth of population, how it fades out, what the borders are, how you give money to places, how you understand healthcare, the delivery of anything, or mapping healthcare, or doing anything about the urban world. How do you do it if you don't have a common language? There isn't. It makes people incredulous that there isn't. There isn't. No bolt of lightning is going to come down and say there is. I have 2 partners on this. One owns Radical Media. I don't know if you ever saw a film called Fog of War, or a show on television that got the Academy Award, or a show called, on the Sundance channel where they interview 2 people. I forget what it is. Somebody tell me the title of it. 2 people are interviewed and they go at each other a little bit. No. We'll think of it in a minute. It begins with I think. Anyway, but also in the iPod ads, that silhouette that dances, anyway, it's Radical Media. And my other partner is Jack Dangerman, and he owns a company who is under the radar. You've never heard of this company. It has 4,000 employees. He owns the whole company. And boy, he runs the whole company. He is a Steve Jobs type of manager of that company. He runs every piece of it. And he's the largest map maker in the world. National G maps are made by Jack Dangerman in Redlands, California. CIA maps, all those maps are made by Jack Dangerman in California. He owns a company called, in your car, that little thing, the software behind that map is Jack Dangerman. It's ESRI. He's my 3rd partner. And he says, it's never been done before. That's a good idea, Richard. So I have 2 good partners, and I'm going to try to do that before I hit 80. Yes, ma'am.
I tried to do that at Sealand Services, Inc. We had to combine the CIA database, which is international, U.S. database from the U.S. Census. ESRI messed up the data. They dropped Louisiana, they did Florida twice. I did the hometown test. I said, where were you born? What county was that in? We check our data to see if it was right. We complained to ESRI to say, fix our data. They said it was such a simple project, they weren't paying attention. And they did fix it. But then a year later, we were bought by Mayor's Corporation. And I don't know if they used our data or not, but we did try to build that database.
I'll give Jack your best. And I'll give you his private number.
I'd like to complain.
But that's aside from the fact that what I'm saying isn't available internationally. And it truly isn't. And I personally would find it interesting to be able to understand success and failure from one city to another, patterns from one city to another, and the patterns of development, speed of development, of how fast a city has grown, like Lagos and some other cities who have grown, that are in, or Vegas was started in 1940. Cities that didn't exist and then all of a sudden exist, very large. Its speed. The largest city in the year 1000 was Cordova, Spain. Isn't that bizarre? It's a way of looking at our world that just astonishes me. So, anyway, lie number one was that we were told things absolutely. That's where I was talking about a few minutes ago. We were told that the smallest thing, when I went to school, was the atom. It was made up of a proton, electron, neutron. Most of it was nothing. I could never understand why I couldn't put my hand through things. Didn't you? You all have that feeling. Well, if it's made of nothing, why can't I put my hand through it? I still have a hard time understanding that. But we were taught that rather absolutely, that was a fundamental, that was like the leg of a chair. Well, we know there's 16 subatomic particles. It'll probably be 70 subatomic particles. I mean, they're going to find a bunch over at CERN. They're going to keep on finding them. Murray Gell-Mann got the Nobel Prize for naming, not finding one, just for naming the quark. So don't think Murray Gell-Mann is such a discoverer. He isn't. He got the Nobel Prize, but he just named quark, came up with that friggin' name. I mean, the first ones, some of them were probably discovered by Richard Feynman, who was a much nicer man and who's dead. The second lie, Murray Gell-Mann came to one of my conferences, and so I said, Murray, let me tell you this. So this grasshopper goes into a bar, and he sits on the stool, and the guy said, the bartender, oh my God, look, they've named a drink after you. And he says, Murray? So I told that to Murray Gell-Mann, he didn't laugh. So I don't have anything for Murray Gell-Mann. The second lie that we were told was that all life starts with photosynthesis. And we were told that absolutely. We did diagrams of that. We worship Ra, the sun god. And of course, in 1999, they found the black smokers in the Pacific. Bob Ballard did, and with the Alvin and some other things. And now they find them a lot of other places. And from the black smokers, much more than a mile down, and in total darkness, there is not only life forms, there are the fastest growing life forms in the whole world. The tube worms that grow in the black smokers. And there's one named after me, Tube Wurman, and Woods Hole named one after me. And when they've been extinguished by a volcano or something down there, in about a year, they all come back in greater numbers. Fastest growing life forms in the world, and probably more animal life down there than above on the planet. Wow, that's really different. That's really quite a different world of where life comes from. And that maybe it started with things in a different way. And then I guess we were told about dinosaurs. I guess I don't object to people telling me these things because that's the best they knew at the time. But they taught it in an absolute way. So any of you who are teachers or involved in teaching or learning or kids, don't tell them things absolutely. Tell them this is the best we know now. And what we know about dinosaurs now is I learned they were slick, slow-moving, dull-witted, non-family creatures that mushed around. They were big and some were ferocious. And now they're certain that many of them had feathers. Feathers? That wasn't my idea of a dinosaur when I grew up. And there's a number of fossils that are found with families grouped together. And they were probably not warm-blooded or cold-blooded, but another set of things, middle-blooded. That there's another thing. It's not just the duality. That's what we're taught. There's just warm-blooded and cold-blooded. There's a middle-blooded creature that could adapt to two things. Well, that's fascinating. And we'll find out something else later. So this is not really a talk about dinosaurs or about all this. It's that everything is wrong. And that by accepting that, you can find pathways that are interesting and have some more correct things, maps that are more correct in your head, patterns that allow you to understand things better. I did a book called Understanding Healthcare, and by putting down the statistics of birth and death that I was given, but never displayed this way, I realized the longer you live, the longer you live. Now, what I mean by that is that there's a curve that happens. He had a copy of the book before. Somebody did. I think Carlos did. I think Carlos is too nervous. He walked out. There's a curve that, when you're 90, you're dead then, according to your average length of life, right? But there's a curve. If you live to be 90, you live to be 94 or something. And if you're 94, you live to be 96. That there really is a whole curve of how long. And particularly, we don't live, the stuff they feed us about how much longer we live today is somewhat of a scam. Not completely a scam. We're living longer than you did in 1900. But we're basically really living longer after you're 30 or 40. We're not living so much longer after you're 30 or 40. It's that we're not killed off young. An awful lot of people were killed off young in the turn of the century. When you take that statistic out of there, being killed off young, and you get past those childhood diseases and those things, we don't live as much longer as if you take it from birth. The statistics can really fool you until you map them yourself. Now, why bother? Just because it's so interesting to start finding out some patterns that are more truthful than what's handed to you. Now, I'm going to hold your question. I created the TED conference. Some people know that. He's sort of plastered it around. And if I asked you here, and I will take questions later on for other reasons, but if I asked you, or if I asked people at a TED conference, how many people would like to ask questions of the speakers? Every hand would go up. And I would say, no. I know you want to, but most questions are bad questions or speeches. There are some good questions, and I will take some bad questions later. But let me just get through this for a while, and then I'll take some other questions. I came across this, which made America really quite interesting to me, and it was in a paper. It happened in 2006, but it was just in a paper about 2 weeks ago. I don't know why. It took 4 years to get into the newspaper. But it was this is the key things from the paper. At 7:46 a.m. on the 17th of October in 2006, Emmanuel Plata, P-L-A-T-A, Emmanuel Plata in Queens, was born. And he was born, and his parents were Mexican immigrants. The doctor was Argentinian. There was 2 nurses. One was Russian and Italian. And the anesthesiologist, was Bulgarian. And I really think that's my America. It really is my America. And it's not a trivial little thing. It really is much more of a footprint of America. Every place I go, it really is made up. And in fact, in this room, I suspect if I asked everybody to sing Happy Birthday in a language other than English, you would have a lot of people singing in other languages that they know and in other ways. In my birthday, sitting around the table, I had 4 grandchildren the manager of the hotel, and 2 of my kids and a girlfriend. And that small group of people sang happy birthday to me in Dutch, Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, Hebrew, and English. And that's my little upper crust family visiting a rich resort. That people are from everywhere, and it's fascinating. And their points of view are fascinating. It's a strangely uncomfortable, I'm strangely uncomfortable with people because most of them say, I know you'll give a good talk. I'm looking forward to your talk. We're very happy to have you here in Charlotte. And I say, why? And how do you know you're happy to have me here? And how do you know it'll be a good talk? I don't know it'll be a good talk. And maybe you won't be so happy when I'm finished. And I can't answer the question, how is everything going? Because it's much too big a question. It's like that question that that joke is that everything is in walking distance if you have enough time. Each of these little pieces of conversation where people tell me, well, to be perfectly honest, what does that mean? You weren't before? To tell the truth. How's it going? Or people uh-huhing each other about a book or a movie. I think it probably was a conversation that occurred before this talk began, you had with somebody, where they mentioned a book or a movie or a story or a fact, and you didn't know what they were talking about. And you went, uh-huh. Or the equivalent. That is a little, you laugh at it a little bit. It gives me tremendous discomfort. And that's my discomfort with the world, of having a horrible thing happen about, well, happened in 1984. There was an explosion in Bhopal, India, of a chemical plant that most of you have heard about. And in the 5th year anniversary, Tom Brokaw, who used to be the news guy on television, he and I are friends, and he asked me to come over to have lunch with he and his staff. And I said, it's the 5th anniversary of Bhopal today. How many people here think it was just about 25 of us or so. How many people here think it took place in a little town or a village or a big town or a city or something? And about half the people there said, well, they didn't really care. That wasn't, it really wasn't interesting. Half of them were interested in it, and of that half, most of them thought it happened in a nice, good-sized village. That was the 5th anniversary, it was 1989. And I said, Bhopal is the largest city in central India. And that in itself is a piece of, is truth, but a piece of misinformation. Because if I tell you that Bhopal is the largest city in central India, most of you will think of other large cities in India. But there's not a person in this room, I would almost be ready to bet, you strike out if you're from India, who can tell me another city in central India. None of the ones you know are in central India. I could be wrong, maybe somebody does know, but I'm telling you, I don't think you do. But it's only a city of about 700,000 people. It's the size of Boston or San Francisco. It's not millions, but that's what you think when I say the largest city in central India. It's very hard to explain something. Very difficult. The following is a joke. There's a little town in Maine called Kittery, lobster town, just across the border, the river that separates Maine from the next state in the south. And a lobsterman has died, old man. His wife is alive, has 2 children. They're up in their years because she's in her 80s. And they realize that their father has died and she has never been to a doctor. There's no baseline for her and they're going to have to take care of her. And they ask her, would you just go to a doctor and have a physical and see how you are so we understand what we're up against and what's happening? And so she goes to have a physical and he pushes and pulls and he takes her blood pressure and does this and that. And then he's interrupted by an emergency call. He's a young doctor and he's interrupted by an emergency call that somebody has a really compound fracture, a lobsterman, and that they have to be attended to. And so he says, I haven't found anything that you're worried about, but I can't continue this now. I have to take care of this emergency. Come in next week and bring a specimen, and we'll do the rest of the exam. And she doesn't know what he's talking about. He says, I have to really go. Bring a urinary sample, and he starts walking for the phone rings again. You got to come down, doctor. He says, look, void in a jar. She's blank. He has to get out of the room. He said, look, go piss in the pot. She says, you go shit in your hat, and walks out. Now, we can laugh at that, and it's funny in a way. It's a joke. I said it was a joke. But at every moment, he was telling the truth. Every piece of language was correct. Void, specimen, urinary sample, piss in the pot was correct. He not only didn't communicate, he insulted her. It's not enough just to use the right language. It's not enough to be self-satisfied with your communication with another human being because your vocabulary is correct, because your grammar is correct, because the numbers make sense. It is really difficult to make that connection. It's not a trivial task. It's not a pretty poster. It's not information graphics. It's not any of those things. It's a tough job. And I don't take it lightly. I take the notion of communicating with other human beings from a stage when I run a conference, or from a book on some subject that I don't know anything about. Let me tell you a little story about that. A woman, this is a made-up story. A woman goes to Santa Fe, and she's amazed at some of the food and the blue tortillas and some of the native Indian food combined with Spanish food, combined with American food. And she opens up a restaurant on Southwest Cooking, and it becomes enormously successful. She goes to New York because of the success, with ideas of grandeur, of wanting to franchise it and everything, and goes to a publisher and says, I would like an advance to do a book on my restaurant's menu and Southwest Cooking. She gets a big advance and goes home and starts the book. I, on the other hand, driving along, come into Santa Fe. I see the food, I think it's pretty good. Never saw food like this. And I go to the same publisher in New York and I said, I'd like to do a book on Southwest Cooking because it's pretty interesting. I don't know a thing about it. I don't understand it at all. And of course, I don't get an advance. But my book would be better. Because my book would be a journey from not knowing to knowing. I can't imagine a life without thinking of things that I don't understand that I would like to clarify for myself. I'm doing another project right now called 5 by 5 by 5 by 5. I'm looking at Japan, United States, Great Britain, Norway, and India. And 5 things that can happen: birth and death, a chronic disease, diabetes, a heart attack, and a trauma accident, at 5 different percentile levels of wealth within percentiles based on each country, and just say, what happens? What happens? I don't understand anything about the healthcare system or what happens to anybody anywhere in the world. How do you get born? How do you die? Do you die differently in a country which has a great nuclear family and you just don't die in an old age home? Do you die differently if the culture's different? Are you born differently? What happens if you have a chronic disease? How do I understand what's going on here in Washington when I can't understand anything else? In the last page of that book 33, I said, let's say your knee hurts. I bet you somebody in this room, their knee hurts. People's knees hurt. Well, you can get a cane. You can have your knee replaced, very painful, they don't tell you that. Very painful. You can have it replaced with a ceramic knee or a titanium knee. You can have it massaged. You can exercise more. You can exercise less. The exercise more thing is interesting. There's just a story out saying that people with bad knees who are runners should run more. I don't get it, but that's one point of view. You could go to a place where everybody's knees hurt, so it doesn't make any difference. You could say, well, I'm too old to do anything, so that's it. You could do a lot of things. One thing I don't find acceptable is having it legislated what should be done to my knee. I can take different opinions. I just don't want it legislated to be told what I'm allowed to do or not allowed to do. And I don't know any way around that. I don't know the solution to that. I just know it's not what I want to have happen to me. I want to make that decision of what I can do with my knee. And for sure, in the next 5 years, my knees are going to hurt. They don't hurt now. A year ago, I go to the doctor every 6 months, and I have a physical. And a year ago, 3 months ago, I went and I had a terrific physical. My blood pressure was good, my cholesterol was extremely low. All the things were fine. So I left and I realized he wasn't going to tell me that I was a fat pig. And I was a fat pig, I was overweight. But he wasn't going to tell me because everything tested out okay. And I wouldn't have listened to him because if somebody tells me to do something, that's for sure what I'm not going to do. So I decided that I would take off weight. And Dean Ornish is a good friend of mine. I think they're all kooks. They all have books, you know, eat grapefruit, don't eat grapefruit, do all this, whatever it is. So I decided that I would just eat less. And it worked. I took off 80 pounds. I took off 80 pounds. And I took off 80 pounds from January to about June, 6 months. I didn't starve. It wasn't difficult. I never found it hard. I certainly intellectually know that if you smoke and give up smoking, it's very easy to go back to smoking. Drink, getting up, drink. Drugs are even harder. And weight is very hard to put on, take off, put on, take off. It really changed my mind about it, about eating and about things. So I'm not telling people they should take off weight or they shouldn't. I'm not preaching about that. I'm just saying that I realized it was not so hard, and it was just deciding to do it. And that I think I have a relationship with my head that I think it's a different person. I don't know how to explain that, but I do think it's somebody else. And it converses with me. Anybody know Emo Phillips, the comedian? He was a wonderful comedian. He used to wear bangs like Prince Valiant. He was a really odd, he was married, no, not married, but living with Judy Denunu for a while. And I used to know Emo Phillips. You ever see Emo Phillips? A very odd comedian. And some of his jokes are very long jokes that he told with a very strange voice, but they were brilliant jokes. One joke was short and that is a fundamental joke of our lives. He said, for years, I won't try to imitate him. He had this high-pitched voice. For years and years and years, I thought my brain was the most important organ of my body. Until one day, I realized, look who's telling me that. Do you see how crazy we are? Look who's telling you your car is broken. Look who's telling you your plumbing needs fixing. Look who's telling you everything that's telling you something. Look who gains from the advice they give you. Look at what doctors tell you, what lawyers tell you. Look at what everybody tells you. How do you get a piece of information that isn't clouded by look who's telling you that? I know that's conspiratorial theory and everything else like that, but it certainly makes me think really hard of whether I need a new pump at home. They don't make that pump anymore, sir. Out of making that pump, you have to get a new pump. And it's a different pump. That happened last weekend. I don't know if it's the truth. I said, let's just have a little lower water pressure for a while and see if we can live with it. And just see what happens. I have a definition for learning that I told at my first TED conference in 1984. And at the first TED conference, the first speech was by John Nesbitt. And John Nesbitt at that time was very famous. He had a book, Megatrends, that was on the bestseller list for 3 years. So it was unheard of. It's one of those books that just kept on top. And now a lot of people have never heard of him. When I've talked to young groups, I talked to a group in Chicago, the people, the average age was in their late 20s. And it was about 400 or 500 people. And only, 10 or 12 knew who Jonas Salk was. And there's probably people here who don't know who Jonas Salk is. It's not awful. It just is what happens. That people who are so well known at a certain time then are not well known. People who are so much part of our lives aren't part of our lives. One year at TED, for 3 days, I had 3 speakers. The first day was Bill Gates, and he was just coming up in the world then. He certainly was probably $1 billion he had, which was a lot then, but it wasn't crazy. And I introduced him by saying, Bill Gates. And then the second day, I had a speaker, and he was the most famous, much more famous than Bill Gates, the most famous business person in America for a short time, and it was John Sculley. He ran Apple, and he sat next to the president's wife at the State of the Union speech. That's how famous he was. And a lot of people don't know who John Sculley is anymore. And I introduced him by saying, John. And the last day, I had a famous music producer, and I said, Q. It was Quincy Jones. And then when Quincy came up, I said, see, Quincy, the more famous you are, the shorter the introduction. Bill Gates, John, Q. And think about that. Think about the mistake of introducing people as another pattern, that we give long introductions to people to try to show they're important, when if they're really important, you shouldn't introduce them at all. You just let them come up. Or say something provocative like, oh, he's simple-minded. Or something like that. Each pattern we have is slightly tweaked, strange, and we accept them. Somebody here in the audience asked me about the simple, this whole philosophy about simplifying things. It was you. And there is a movement afoot of trying to simplify language and simplify forms and everything. And I think she was taken aback when I said I am adamantly opposed to that. I'm adamantly opposed to anything that is based on taking away information, which the movement is somewhat based on, cleaning up things. I believe in clarification, but I believe in finding a path through the same or even more information, but have it clarified. I don't believe in dumbing down anything. So I don't believe in simplifying things. I believe in clarifying things. Wherever Carlos says he can just yell when he wants me to stop or do something else, but I'll tell one more story, and then I'll take some questions. I want to tell you the story behind 33 a little bit. In 1976, I was national chairman of the AIA convention, which was in Philadelphia because of the bicentennial. And the conference was called the Architecture of Information, and I came up with the idea of being an information architect in that year, and sort of coined that term. And in fact, in 3 days, I'm going to Phoenix, or 2 days, and I'm going to give a keynote at a conference which is called Information Architecture, which I've never heard of and has been going on for 5 years. And I'm going to give a keynote at a conference of a name that I coined and have a birthday party. So I decided, since I coined the term and nobody knew what I was talking about, I couldn't get a keynote speaker, and even for me, it was too brazen to give the keynote speech at my own conference. So I decided to write a fable and have it performed. And the fable was called What If Could Be, an historical fable of the future. And the idea of this fable was in a city called What If, in a land called Could Be. It was broken, and they invited the Commissioner of Curiosity and Imagination in to change the city. They would do whatever he said to do for a year. And what he decided to do was the opposite of things. This is 1976. So he changed the laws of copyright to the right to copy. And he changed, it was amazing. That was unheard of then. Now, people kind of accept that, but not then. He decided to zone all the public property rather than the private property. So the streets were zoned. Once you zone the streets, there can't be zoning variances. Once the streets are zoned, the city is zoned, and there can't be any developers changing any variance. There can't be variances. The streets give you access to everything, and you really can plan a city if you zone the public property, not the private property. He started only he closed all the city agencies, of course, and he started only one new one called the Department of Waiting to be Wanted, which was dedicated to old people and old buildings. He started one new museum called the Museum of Failure, dedicated to mistakes and failure. The only problem was it was an overnight success. Anyway, that was then. And then some people have asked me about the book, because I never sold the book. I just had a few copies, and somebody wanted me to redo it. And of course, I don't redo things. And so I decided that I would write a sequel to it and put within the sequel the old book and sort of talk to the old book. And that's when I did 33. And 33 is the title because it happened 33 years ago when I did the first one. Doesn't mean anything else, except that down your spine you have 33 vertebrae, and the spine of the book has 33s on it. But you can take any number and make a whole polemic out of it. And they go to find him because he's banished, and he's banished to an atoll in the South Pacific, which really exists, Kapangi Morongi. Beautiful name, isn't it? Kapangi Morongi. The language they speak is Kapangi. And it's 400 miles south of Ponape, that's the nearest place. And to the northeast is the Marshall Islands. And in 1850, there was a warring party from the Marshall Islands that came over to Kapangi Morongi and slaughtered 1,000 of the 1,200 people. And that's the first time the people on Kapangi Morongi knew there was other people on Earth besides themselves. So through YouTube, these young people in What If find old films of the Commissioner of Curiosity and Imagination, and they go to find him, and he doesn't want to come back because he's really not interested. He's having a good time. He has 33 children, and he's enjoying life in Kapangi very much, even though it has no electricity, but also has no television, and he really misses television. And they promise him, and they tell him stories of television, of flat screens and many channels, and the access to information. And they promise him a flat screen television set, so he comes back for that. And the book is really 33 episodes of a TV program of his observations of things that he thought were good that turned out to be bad, where he was wrong. Things that were bad turned out to be good. And things that still were just terrible of what he saw when he came back to What If in the land of Could Be, and now with a new commander-in-chief in a capital called Wilby. And the book is just a long conversation about ideas and finding patterns. And in the process, I found little things that connect now with some other things I'm doing. At the TED Med conference last year, I had David Blaine. Some of you know him as a magician. And he's a friend of mine, and I had a he's never given a public talk. He does his things in public, magic, but he's not a public person. And so I convinced him to come and tell the story of what he did on Oprah's show of holding his breath for 17 minutes, 4.4 seconds. How did he train himself to do that? And what are the extremes of the human body? And I learned that you could hold your breath for more than 3 minutes. He trained me the night before to hold my breath for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. And it took about 35 minutes of training. And he's going to try to do it this year for about 20 minutes. But what I learned is that the old things that I knew, which were you had to breathe every 3 minutes, and you had to drink every 3 days, and you had to eat every 3 weeks, that some of those things perhaps are not true. Some of the most basic things we've learned aren't the pieces we should build our understanding out of. There's some questions. I won't be nasty, I promise. Yes, sir.
Okay, so,
I'll repeat it if they hear it.
all right. So a week or so ago, I was at
You can turn around and tell the audience, and I'll hear you too.
a week or so ago, I was at a dinner party in Seattle, and one of the questions that was broached was whether we're, 100 or 1,000 years from now, will sociologists look at us, this generation, as an enlightened generation or a silly generation? And it would have been interesting to have you at that dinner table. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts might be on that.
Who else was at the dinner table?
Some technologists from Microsoft, no one you really know.
I will answer that question, but there are some people who I know want to leave, and they want to leave with dignity. Why don't we stand up, let those people leave, and then sit down and we'll answer as many questions as you want. If anybody wants to get up and leave with dignity, that's fine with me. Okay? You had your chance. Well, it's just fine. I'm not interested in most talks I go to, so I understand people not being interested in anything I'm saying. I don't feel that that's a given by any means. Everything is so primitive that I see. And there's an arrogance about thinking we're doing something that's amazing all the time. I love the fact I have my iPhone, and I am personally amazed for myself in a very bounded way, but I know it's going to look absolutely absurd in a very short time that we were happy with this. We have websites that are basically big pages out of books that are designed, and you have lots of things going on in some movie every once in a while, and lots of things, you can push a button and go here. Static little things without any understanding that the web is a movie, and that it's not a matter of having 1,000 or 100 screens to sell a product or to go in to find out about a hotel. It's an infinite number of pages. They can sell real estate if they want to make money off the pages they have there. And that's what the iPad is going to be. It's going to be a continuous movie. It's a continuous thing in action that you can keep on just going here and flying through and going there. Eventually, not when it first comes out, but I think what we're doing now is clumsy beyond clumsy. And everything I've done and my websites that aren't bad are clumsy, stupid websites that are still based on a different way of thinking, the same way that movies were based on stage shows. You know, they were photographing stage shows and they made movies out of them. You always base it on the technology before of what they can think. So everything is book-based in some strange way, even though it comes over. So I think we're silly. I don't think, but we're certainly living in, the Chinese curse. I curse you, may you live in interesting times. It's interesting times. And we will still have these game changers. It seems that you can only do so many game changing at once and take anybody along with you. It's silly that in 1962, it was obvious to me we should do maps the same scale. I was 26, now I'm 75, I'm doing the same fucking project again. I haven't come anywhere, and I haven't been able to get it together or people to see that this just makes sense. Whether I do it or somebody else does it, it makes sense for somebody to do. I don't anymore care whether I do it. It just should be done. There's some basic things we should do. The schools are absurdly bad. And we're flushing the same stuff in the same toilet. There's no, the system keeps on coming back into the toilet. How can you teach things that people aren't interested in? Learning is remembering what you're interested in. Very few words. Learning, remembering, interest. What are we teaching? We're teaching things that people aren't interested in. You memorize things you're not interested in. You bulimically put them down on a piece of paper called a test, and then you forget them. We're teaching gin rummy memory. That's the basic premise. We're not everything connects with everything else. If you're interested, Stephen Jay Gould, I hope some of you know who he is. His major speeches on statistic analysis, fundamental talks about statistical analysis and probability. Of course, he was a great Darwinian. Were based on baseball, because he loved baseball. Everything connects with everything. If you're interested in cars, you don't say, I don't want to talk about cars with you. Cars are about. Do you know that if traffic stops on the Washington Bridge in New York, it's exactly the same pattern as peristaltic action of you swallowing in your throat? There's a connection between peristaltic action and swallowing and physics and cars, and you can teach everything by teaching everything else. Everything connects, and it can be taught through people's interest. All you need is a little bit of passion and do maps. You need guides and guide books or guide pads, not teachers and textbooks. But it's not going to change because we live in a society where people do what they are able to do. So, if you can, here's a little story about the Mac. The Mac showed us it was easy to make pie charts. So we made pie charts. Oh, but we could do pie charts in 16 colors, 32 colors, millions of colors. And we could make them three-dimensional. And we could tilt them and they could be in perspective. And we can explode them out and have shadows from them. And they could be in color and shades and shadows and millions of colors. And nobody questioned that one of the worst ways to show comparative statistical analysis is using a pie chart in the first place. But we could do it, so we did it. We go for the things we can do, not the things that make sense. We go for making things look good rather than be good. There is a place in the road where we can take a left or a right, and we always take the left. I don't mean left, political left. Left to make it look good rather than be good. Left making yourself look smart rather than making yourself look stupid and ask a question. If you're in a meeting in a corporation and you don't understand what they're saying and you make believe you do because you want to impress the boss, you did two mistakes. One, you didn't show your courage and you didn't learn anything. You'll be much better if you say, I don't understand a word you said. It wasn't clear. You're not going to insult the boss. He made a mistake. He didn't make it clear enough. Somebody was ranting to me before, and I wrote her name down. Angela. So Angela was saying how upset she was. I don't know if she's still here. Angela, you still here? There she is. There you are. She was ranting. Well, it was a good rant. How can the newspapers write stuff that we don't understand? And how can they keep on doing this? How can they make that? Oh, come on. Really? In the cover of a book I did many, many years ago, which was called Information Anxiety 2, and did it in the first one, Information Anxiety, the first one, I said, there's not an information explosion, there's an explosion of non-information. It's not our fault. We blame ourselves, we can't understand things. It's their fault. If you can't understand something, they didn't make it understandable. And even with that little joke I told you about go piss in the pot, that's it. It's true. We don't talk to people in a way that they can understand. How big is an acre? Does anybody know how big an acre is?
43,000 square feet.
No, close. How big is an acre? He was close. Okay. Well, he's so close. But the fact is, it's 43,560 square feet. But it doesn't tell anybody anything, because you can't imagine 43,560 square feet, and that's accurate. But if I tell you, sir, that an acre for Americans is about the size of a football field, just a teeny bit smaller, except for the end zones, you'll never forget what an acre is. And it's not as accurate. I wouldn't buy land that way. But if I had to tell somebody what an acre is, I'd say it's about the size of a football field without the end zones. That's good enough. That communicates. Nobody bothers to do that. How big is a dollar bill? It's not exactly 6 inches. It's a teeny bit bigger. Why? I have no idea. But it's 6.14 inches. We don't know how big everything is. We go in an airplane and we see squares on the ground. How big are they? Well, they're 640 acres. Why? Because it's a mile on a side. Everything is interesting and helps us with understanding and getting the next level down and everything. So, you had a question.
Wait a minute, whoa.
Yeah,
Well, you don't get a follow-up. What the hell do you think is a press conference? Sir.
Yeah, my question is kind of a wrap-up of what you said. You mentioned two things. One is that you don't have to tell things in absolute terms because things may change in the future. Okay, so you said
No,
that.
it's not okay, but I'll let you go with your speech and then I'll respond.
Well, I remember that you mentioned that you don't have to tell things in absolute terms.
It's not that you don't have to.
So-
As what I was saying is you can teach things as being the best you know at the moment, but
Okay.
not that they would never change.
Okay,
You have to teach them in the context of a changing world with changing knowledge forever.
Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to base my question, because part of I think of your success with your conferences or also with your approach to selling your ignorance is the fact that you try to also become friendly to the audience. Like you're saying, I don't know everything. I'm going to do my research, and if you trust me, you can buy my books, and we will learn together. So my point is, many times when you see schools, they have the idea of that they can teach you because they know everything. It's more like they teach you in the absolute way, and also they don't use the power of storytelling. So my question to you is how you can combine the power of storytelling or also teaching by showing your weak side so we can engage people and make more dynamic environments.
I think I understand your question, and you won't like my answer. My answer is I can't even imagine anything that can be done that fixes the educational system and turns it into a learning system. I don't think you can get from here to there. There's some, I was brought up by my parents and by the school system and by the world around me saying that if you work hard enough or so, every problem can be solved. Well, I don't think you can solve that problem. I don't think you can solve a problem with the givens. You're not going to get rid of the school teachers union. You're not going to get rid of the school teachers we have. You're not going to get rid of the physical plant and think of how. I mean, in the first fable, I said, stop building schools. If you build over 7 stories, the top floors of the building, or top 2 floors, become schoolhouses. So there's schoolrooms all over the city. And that's the privilege you get for building high in a city. You get the privilege of building higher, getting more rent, more space, more cubage, because you have schoolrooms all over the city. And kids go all through buildings to go up to their classrooms and see the city and see a city living city. And you have schools throughout the whole city. The whole city becomes a schoolhouse. But that's not what's going to happen, even if it makes sense, because we want school bonds. And the architects want schools to build. And the developers, I think, would love it to be able to have more cubage on the same property, but maybe that's not enough. But there are ways of solving some problems by coming in that way, but I don't know how you go at it and really fix it. I just don't know how you do it. Yes, sir. I'll give you a follow-up later. Go ahead. No, I want him. He was more active. He got up.
variety of people willing to ask questions that may appear stupid. And actually in the this book by Michael Lewis on The Big Short, all the people who got subprime right were
Oh, how about
outsiders.
that autistic guy who made $1 billion or $700 million?
Right. So it seems to me that you can ignore what other people think of you if you're autistic or if you're sort of old enough or rich enough. But for
I'm
other,
old enough and rich enough. Thank you very much.
But for other people, we may be terrified about the scorn of our colleagues or other people looking
That's right.
askance. How hard was it for you before you became old enough
All right. Oh,
and rich enough to?
I didn't hear the last thing, but you laughed at it, so obviously it was an insult.
Seriously,
Okay, I'm 75 now. At 45, I got married for the second time. At the age of 45, I'd just been fired as a dean of a school. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't own one piece of real estate, one bond, one piece of stock. I had an old Honda Civic when they were little. I was out of work and I had no skill sets. I had 2 children, one graduating high school and one going to start college. I married a woman who had no family money, I told you that. Married a woman who didn't have family money, and she had 2 little teeny kids. And I had just moved to LA from Philadelphia, where I knew everybody, to LA, where I didn't know anybody. I was basically destitute at 45. And I kept on doing the same thing. And eventually, I wasn't destitute, but I didn't change. I didn't have a windfall. I didn't have a miracle drug. I didn't pop pills. I didn't kill anybody. I can't point to any event except that I believed that what I was doing made sense. I did the first Access guide, and I couldn't get a publisher because I went into publishers with that same story. I said, I'd like to do a book on LA because I moved here and can't find my way around. They thought I was a fucking loony. And I couldn't get anybody to distribute it because we don't distribute one book. You have to be a book chain for us to do that. We can't buy a book. I sold it out of my car to car washes and to drugstores. Somehow, eventually, I had a little more money at the end of the year than the beginning of the year, but I didn't have a windfall profit. And over the years, I kept on thinking of ideas and selling them. I sold Access Press, I sold my conference, I sold the understanding business. I'll sell these pants if somebody wants them. But I didn't have a windfall, I didn't do anything, and there's no magic bullet. I just wanted to do it really badly. And if I hadn't made money, I wouldn't have made money, as long as I could still do stuff that I want to do. And I told you about 5x5, and I told you about 19, 20, 21. I'm doing the TED Medcom. I told you about this. I have 6 other things I'm trying to. I have a fundamental every day of my life. I say, if you don't ask, you don't get, and most things don't work. Think about those 2 things. If you don't ask, you don't get, and most things don't work. Now, that gives me power because I'm willing to accept that most things don't work. And most people aren't willing to accept that kind of failure. I think I fail all the time. I'm terrified and I'm confident. I am that dance. I am the tango. And it doesn't pull me apart. It's part of my life. I was just in Mexico. This is an interesting story. Trust me, for the 2 people who want to ask questions. I know you want one, he wants one. He wants a follow-up. I mean, he's greedy. And you, I didn't forget you, or did you just ask one? He did. I don't forget you. You're wearing white. I was just in Mexico. I love the Yucatan. By the way, the Yucatan. We think that big bump that comes down is the Yucatan. Well, it isn't the Yucatan. There's 3 states. There's the Yucatan, whose capital is Merida. There's Campeche, whose capital is Campeche. And there's the Quintana Roo, whose capital is Chetumal, where Cancun is an invented city, right? Quintana Roo only became a state as part of Mexico in 1915, but it still was lawless and really didn't join up with Mexico until 1931. Who knows that? And they're our neighbors. Well, you don't know that. Shame. Anyway, so I was down there in Mexico staying at a bunch of haciendas. Haciendas are fantastic. What is the story of haciendas? An amazing story. And around 1850, we had a big change in the world, the Industrial Revolution. So people were shipping things. They were shipping food, and they were shipping cloth, and they were shipping tea. They were shipping people. They were shipping everything back and forth, shipping, and most everything had to be wrapped. And they didn't have duct tape. And they didn't even have good wires, and they didn't have corrugated cardboard. They had no way of wrapping things. They needed string. They needed sisal. Where were they going to grow sisal? One place in Africa, and the Yucatan is where it grew. So they set up these great big farms with hundreds of hectares. Anybody know how big a hectare is? Some people do know that, don't they? How many acres? No, 2.54 or something like that. Anyway, it's about the same as what if you remember what a centimeter and an inch is, it's almost the same as that. So they built these wonderful haciendas because they were so isolated in this arid, terrible area. They built their own schools, own little hospitals, places for the people to live, and they were isolated. And then they had big basins to collect the water when it rained because it's arid, lots of people working. And at the turn of the century, 50 years later, there was more millionaires living in that area than any other place in the world. And then what happened? Well, other inventions changed. And so they all went into ruin. So there's 150 beautiful ruins in that part of the world. And one family, very wealthy family, the Hernandez Ramirez, Roberto and Claudia, who owned Bancomex, which they sold to Citibank. I knew. Okay, are you with Citibank?
Was years ago.
Okay, it was the only profitable part of their portfolio last year, was the portfolio of Bancomex, by the way.
Well, the stock maybe.
I didn't say the stock was, I just said that part of Citibank's portfolio. So they bought 100 of these haciendas and started converting them and saving them, and they're astonishing. You can go online and see them. 8 of them are hotels, small, 8 rooms, 10 rooms, 20 rooms, the most beautiful things, and they also collect incredible Mexican art. But that's not the story. Here's the story. At the end of my trip, where I spent 2 weeks going around to Mayan architecture, because I told you I'm interested in Mayan architecture, I had mapped Tikal, and I go keep up with all the new Mayan ruins. Claudia calls me on my cell phone and says, would you come over? I'm nearby Merida. I know you're leaving tomorrow morning. Would you come by and have dinner? She sends a car. I go there and have dinner at a hacienda I had never seen before that was so big that the chapel looked like the Madeleine in Paris. I mean, really breathtaking. Breathtaking, I can't describe how amazing it is. They had maybe 2,000 to 3,000 little lights with candles all over the yard. You can swim from the main bedroom in a tunnel going out to the swimming pools. I mean, it was like La La Land, and beautifully furnished, minimalist, absolutely minimalist furniture. Anyway, so I come in there, and she was having a dinner party, and I was the special guest. She didn't tell me that. And there's 25 people for dinner with 25 people serving us. And among them was the head of the Catholic Church of that area. So I told him I was his token Jew for the night. And then we had a couple great archaeologists, and we talked about Mayan archaeology, and then the rest of the table. And so at a certain part in the middle of dinner, they asked me to tell us some stories. So I told one story to the Monsignor. It was a story that happened when I was 24, where I was obsessed with meeting the Pope. And I went to Europe, and I wangled my way into a big audience with the Pope in Castel Gandolfo. And they had Monsignor Landi, a big Monsignor in Rome, get me a ticket, and I drive there in my deux chevaux, which I was camping in, and I go to ushered in the front door, and the whole room is filled because I was late. Pope wasn't there yet, but the stage is filled, and everybody on the stage is dressed in red. And the audience is filled with thousands of people, and they usher me down the main aisle up into the stage. And I'm on the stage where everybody else is a cardinal. And the Pope comes in, and he was that Pope that looked like that little king. Remember the little king comics? This Pope John, whatever, who was just amazing. He came in, and he was like one of those few people that have an aura. I know one other person that has an aura. I don't know anybody else who has an aura. And he came in, and it was an astonishing experience for me. absolutely unforgettable to be in the presence of somebody who was so loved and who was interesting to people. They wanted to be there so much. And I think my passion for doing the TED conference came from that night, that afternoon, of seeing somebody, albeit just his side and back, because I wasn't in the audience. And he spoke many languages to the audience, and it was an astonishing experience. Then I told a story about archaeology to the archaeologists. And then the third story I told to the whole table, which I said, because there's a lot of rich people there, I said, I'm more powerful than anybody else at this table. I thought that would rev them up. And I said, I'm more powerful because I have a much deeper embrace with my ignorance than anybody else here has. And it's my embrace with my inabilities that make me more powerful than anybody else at this table. I didn't say richer. I just said, personally, I feel more powerful because you are all trying to be smarter than you are. And you don't embrace how stupid you are. Those who didn't speak English didn't get it. In the white.
This is a very simple question. I just said that to kind of rouge you a little bit, because I know you said not to use very and simple. What is the best thing that we've done, and what is the worst thing we've done?
Oh, okay. That's a very good question. And I don't think I have a very good answer. That's a very hard question to answer. I don't think I can answer that. I don't think I've done some things that are, I've told you already, I did 4 OK conferences and 4 OK books. I don't think I've done anything that I could call best or anything that's that good. The best thing I've done was done for me, and that's the world lets me survive. I shouldn't survive. I shouldn't, it's an incredible gift that's been given to me that I can be this asshole and survive. No, I'm serious. I'm not making fun. I'm being serious. I think it's a miracle. It's a miracle that I can do things that I like to do, think up ideas, get some of them done, screw up some other things. And I'm so grateful that this strange land and the strange combination of, people like him asking me here, I don't know why anybody wants me or wants around. I don't understand anything like that. I just don't get it. I have a nice room here in the hotel. I don't need a nice room. I live beyond any dream I ever had. So that's the best thing. The best thing is that I'm allowed to be. The worst thing, I guess, nothing comes right to mind. So there's no great, massacre I've done that I can remember. But my 75 years show today, because he gave me a present, which I said I was going to wear tonight, a scarf, and I didn't because it's too hot. And he gave me a present, and on the card was a picture of Muhammad Ali. And I said, oh shit, I had dinner with Muhammad Ali. And I was remembering that night, and I was trying to remember, it was Muhammad Ali and one of his handlers, and I couldn't think of the actress that was there. So I had to call home, I had to call my wife, and she said, Jacqueline Bisset. So it was Jacqueline Bisset. So it was Jacqueline Bisset, and she goes up to Muhammad Ali, she says, oh, it's so amazing to meet you. This is about 20 years ago, and he was already not in good shape. Goes up and says, amazing meeting you and everything. He says, what do you do? He said, I'm an actress. Would I have ever seen you in anything? And she rattles off about 10 pictures. He said, no, I haven't seen those. She wasn't that bright, but she was pretty. Yeah. Oh, no, you weren't next. You wanted a question.
One of our native sons, Billy Graham, gave a talk.
Oh, Billy. Oh, my God. Let me tell you about his talk. It was wonderful. I know he was born here.
Yeah.
And people gave me real shit for having him, because I didn't announce
You
the
were
speech.
involved in that, right?
Yes, sir.
For having him at TED?
Yeah. I got real shit from the people in the audience when they saw that he was there, because I didn't announce speakers. And Billy came up, and he was up on the third day. The speech before him was Larry Ellison. And Larry Ellison had a lot of handlers around him. This will probably get back to Larry Ellison, but that's the way it is. And he gave a so-so speech. And as he's coming up to the stage, Billy, and I'm helping him, he's frail by this time anyway. This is a number of years ago, but he still was frail. He's coming up to the stage, he says, and he's mic'd to Larry, "Would you please stay for my talk?" Billy Graham comes up to the stage, starts talking. Larry's in the front row, gets up and walks out with his entourage. Incredible. Anyway, long talked about afterwards. Billy gives this speech. And I was a little worried that he was going to... I mean, nobody in that audience has ever been to a Billy Graham meeting, for sure. You know, after his speech, I said, well, I think I'm going to do an all-Jewish TED called Ted Schmed someday. Anyway, so Billy gives this talk where he makes lots of references. And he's frail. He says, the doctor said I should not have taken this trip. They didn't want me to. So he was that far along at that time. And he's leaning on a podium, which I had to bring specially because I never have a podium because I don't want people's crotches protected. Because it makes you more vulnerable if you don't have a podium. And he gave this talk, and the talk was about, and I told this to Carlos. I said, the talk was about how he had heard things that he'd never heard before in the speeches before him. And he referenced specific things. He never knew that that could be done. He heard ideas that were spectacular, things that he didn't think were possible, dreams that he didn't think people could have. And at the end of all of it, he had only one thing to leave the audience with. And that is, it just makes me feel that there must be something else. Hushed to the crowd. An incredible religious message. Quiet, that quiet that comes from being touched, particularly being changed. And then he got a standing ovation and he walked off. About 2 weeks later, he writes me this long personal letter, which I have framed in my office. I'm very proud of this particular letter, in which he said it was the best conference he'd ever been to. He wished he had known me a long time ago. I could have helped him with his crusade. And, but that he was very moved by being there, and he just loved the experience, and people loved the experience of him being there. And his phrase, "there must be something else," to me is also a non-religious phrase. I think you can take it in a way that is not religious, but just life-enhancing. That whatever you think of in what our age is, or whatever we're doing, there must be something else. There must be something else. There's always something around the corner. And it was a very helpful speech to me. It meant something to me, that speech, and I didn't think so because I'm such a curmudgeon. And he resonated. And we have sent things back and forth over the years a few times. Now, not much at all, but for a few years we sent little things back and forth. So, now you were going to say something about Billy.
Well, it was just an interesting talk. I mean, he made the observation that science and religion were important to work together. And
Were you there, or you saw it on television?
I watched
So-
it over and over again. It was very moving. And
On TED Talks.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he said that we're not just mind and body, but we also have a soul.
Yeah.
And it seemed to resonate
Yeah.
that night.
Did I do a bad job of telling it over?
No,
Okay. I mean, because I haven't watched it since.
it was really well
was good.
done. And thank you for whatever you did to put it on.
Oh, well. The whole conference was just a way of giving people permission. And that's, I might not particularly like you people, but I give you permission to do the things you like. And what you like is valid. Everybody's interests are valid. And I validate interest, even if they're not my own. And if you can pick and choose from some of the ones that I've put in front of people that might take you on a path, then that's fine. And if I don't, then you don't come next year. I mean, it's okay. I just tried to do the best conference in the world. The new owner, who's doing an amazing job, is trying to change the world. I'm not trying to change the world, because it's just not what I stay up nights doing. I just try at each thing I do to make it better. Now,
I'm actually not going to ask the question you think I'm going to ask, because of the simplicity thing. I'm going to ask a different question.
this wasn't a loaded thing, just
No.
you put up your hand.
Your book, Information Anxiety, and we know that you start with data, you go to information.
Yeah.
You're lucky you get to knowledge.
Yeah.
How do you get to wisdom when, like you, everything we're told by everybody maybe contains an element of truth, but nothing is true? How do you get from data to wisdom? Because wisdom, I think, is where we all aspire.
Yeah, we're not going to get, very few people are going to get there. I mean, you aspire for it. There's a few, few people who maybe have the trigger, you feel have it, or some special knowing, or maybe there's no line between knowledge and wisdom, and I made it up for the book's sake. I mean, it's not an exact science, what we're talking about. We're talking about sort of fuzzy stuff. If that little group of words helps somebody in their journey, fine. The one thing in that book that's more powerful than that is the fact that there's only 5 ways of organizing information. Now, that was a revelation to me. I was doing this book, and I thought my preconception was, because I was going to do a chapter on organizing information, and my preconception was there was thousands of ways of organizing information. And when I got down to doing that chapter, and the whole book, by the way, none of it's written, it's all dictated by me. That book is just a dictated book. I can't stand writing. So I realized there's only 5 ways. I couldn't think of any other ways. There's location, alphabet, time, category, and hierarchy. LATCH, latch. And I've said this literally to 1 million people in lectures and then on videos and in other ways it's been said. So 1 million people have seen it, read it, everything. And I clearly say, if you have a 6, the next time I do this lecture, I'll say there's 6 ways of organizing information. I mean, it's not set in stone. It's just that nobody in 20 years has come back to me with 6 ways. If you want to, do it. I don't care. But basically, if you know those 5, it's enough ways to start any project. The way in is important. For instance, a fact in my life, the guidebook I did, which is the Access Guides. All guides up until that guide were organized by category. Chapter on hotels, a chapter on restaurants, a chapter on museums, a chapter on this. And I mixed up all the entries so that each entry was next to where it was. So a hotel, if there was a restaurant by the hotel, it was a word map. It was organized primarily by location, secondarily by category. Things were color-coded by category, restaurants, hotels, shops, stuff like that. And tertiary, the organization was hierarchy because I rated restaurants and hotels by dollars or by quality. So I used several ways, but the way in, the first way in, how you organize information, the same information, if you organize a different way, it's a different book. The same information. It's different. So the organization of information actually creates new information and new patterns. So that's very much part of my life. And I think about that organization of things with everything I do, whether it's medical things. And that's why it doesn't make any difference what subject my books are. They're always, it's the journey of how I take that information and organize it so I can understand it. The subject is less important. He had a follow-up question. I'm going to let him do it, and then I'm going to talk. Oh, since you put up your hand, I'm not going to let you ask a question, but I'm going to make a polemic about badges. I hate everybody's badge. I hate this familiarity that has come over the world that badges should have your first name large. I don't know you. And there's no reason for me to call you Mary or Betty or John or Jake. I know your last name is the way I should address you. It's just simple courtesy. I wouldn't write you a letter if I don't know you by saying Mary. I wouldn't do that. And this forced familiarity that every conference I go to has people's first name large, so we should be friendly, appalls me. Absolutely is appalling. And it shouldn't be done, Carlos. Okay. Shouldn't be done. Yes.
My question is, you mentioned education, which is a soft spot in my heart. And what mystifies me is we obviously...
I never mentioned the word education. I mentioned the word
talk
learning.
about schools.
Learning.
You
Learning.
talk about schools.
Yeah, but learning is a much better word than education.
Learning. But we obviously have all the resources to solve these problems. What are the barriers? Why don't we solve them? I mean, it's like this huge mystery to me that we don't just do this right. What's stopping us?
In a very strange way, the same thing that's stopping Israel and the Hamas from getting together. There's some things that can't be solved. There's some things that have too many. Everest Galwad, anybody ever hear of him? He's the man who solved for the lead. You heard of him, right? Did you put up your hand? I thought, he was the man who died in a duel in Paris when he was 18, the night after he solved the fact that you could have 4 unknowns in a quadratic equation, one of the great mathematicians. Well, there's only so many unknowns you can handle. You should all know who Everest Galwad is, by the way. Anyway, there's only so many unknowns, and there's so many unknowns in the learning system about teachers. It's not the money, it's not the facilities. It's so fundamental that you are not asked what you're interested in. You are not taken by the hand to track your interests. I wasn't, you weren't, nobody's doing it now. Learning is remembering what you're interested in. The word interest does not come up. Okay, here's a true story. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I started architecture school when it was 5-year undergraduate. That's what it was. It was considered the best school of architecture in the country at that time. Probably not now. Lou Kahn was there, Bob Venturi was there, Aldo Jergala was there, a lot of people like that. It was a wonderful school. I didn't know that, but I heard that it was the best school. I only applied to one place, University of Pennsylvania, because I assumed I would get in. And I went the first day, and they gave me something, and they said, you're an incoming freshman, go to your advisor, these are the courses you're going to take. I said, I can't start this way. I can't start by being told exactly what I'm going to take, and I have to get a signature when you're telling me what I have to take. What is the signature for? If you're telling me what I have to take, then just give it to me. But I don't want to sit and wait to have an advisor sit with me and sign something. I can't start my career that way. So I went in to talk to the dean. And it was difficult to do. One, his secretary was really tough, and second, he was an anti-Semite. But I got in, and I talked with him, and I said, I would like to make a deal with you, Dean. So I took about 2.5 to 3 loads, 2.5 at least. I never worked hard in my life. I've never worked this hard since. And the epiphany that it's not an epiphany, this realization that came was that I didn't have any time to study for any exam. I was in class all the time. So what's the purpose of taking notes? You take notes to study from. So I never took notes. It was revelatory because I told my brain was telling me, if you take notes, you don't have to remember or listen because it's there. I got rid of that cycle. And my brain says, no, you got to remember what you're hearing. You got to fucking listen. You got to really listen and connect to something because you're going to be tested on it. I got rid of that cycle. So I never took notes, and I graduated first in my class. And it was an accident that my memory got to be better. I was forced into it, but my own braggadocio, my pomposity, pushed me into a realization that your brain, when you take notes, is saying you don't have to remember. And I believe it does. That is totally unscientific. That is completely unscientific, but I know what he does because he told me. He wants the hook.
8 o'clock. And
Wait, 1 minute, 1 minute. One last story. In 1398, Gutenberg was born. Amazing. He was born in 1398, and he proceeded to, about 50 years later, 40 years later, to do the first printed book in the Western world. There was movable type in China before that. So he cut the type, and he cut 126 letters, because he cut type that was the spacing between L's and B's and C's and D's, all the spacing between letters. He had to invent the paper because there was no paper that could take ink, and he had to invent the idea of dampening the paper because they didn't have paper that did that. And he invented the ink because all they had was water-based ink. He invented an oil-based ink. And with his brother, he took a wine press and invented the printing press. It's based on a wine press. And he printed between 180 and 200 of his 42-line Bibles. Only a few, not too many remain. Some were in 2 colors. 42 lines was how many lines were on the page, and some were, he ran through twice in red and black. That still isn't the story. There's 2 other stories. One, Martin Luther, in reaction to the fact that the printing press was invented and the church could then print indulgences, which were confession sheets, and make money from it, when he hammered his thing on the church that started Lutheranism, he didn't know that at the time. That was funny. Was one of the main reasons was these indulgences which came out of the printing press. But that's still not the story. It took 99 years after the printing press was invented for somebody else to come up with pagination so that you could look up a page and find something. And pagination is the precursor to a life we have now, which is finding things. By page numbers, by the alphabet, through Google now, through the white pages, the yellow pages, through all kinds of things. And it all goes back to 1398 when in Mainz, Germany, where you should go, they have a nice Gutenberg Bible, a couple of them there, and the Gutenberg Museum. And Mainz isn't a bad town, they have a nice square. Not too hard to get to from Munich. It's an amazing story about how things connect and where we are today. And a Find It generation that goes back to an amazing, amazing, beautifully printed book that John Warnock, who founded Adobe, and Adobe is in the type business, says that no matter what we have done, we have not been able to create a book and a typesetting algorithm that sets type as well as the Gutenberg Bible, the first book printed in the Western world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. You know, I sold you like the unguru, but the more I was listening, the more I thought these poor people now go home and have to make all these connections in their heads. And that's basically what the guru does. Essentially, now you pepper all these stories and you impacted us with all these stimuli, and now we have to make our own connections as individuals and generate the conversations that perhaps will make us realize that we are Charlotte, obviously, and the Charlotte we want to design maybe starts with the design of our lives from a different perspective. Just a little shift that could happen today maybe makes an impact that then allows us to lead by example and generate waves that we don't know how powerful they could be. So
I would like to give an invitation to them. First of all, I would love you to look at the 192021.org site. It's a pretty little site. It was done a year and a half ago. We have huge amounts more that we haven't put up yet, but it's a pretty little flash presentation. It's 192021.org. Not selling anything on it, and it's not linked to anything. Okay? There's nothing linked to it. It's just there because we could do it. Then I'd love you to look at the TED Med site and then look at some of the TED Med talks, because some of them are rather extraordinary, and particularly the David Blaine one is amazing, and the Ayalis talk is terrific, and Dean Kamen's talk is terrific, and we're going to have it again in October. I hope some people can come and see it, and if you can't come see it, you could look at the website and see some of the talks. But and if anybody wants to write me, it's rsw@wurman.com. I don't promise you I'll answer it, but I promise you I'll read it. rsw@wurman.com. Often my answers are no, which is a complete sentence. But you're welcome to write me at rsw@wurman.com. That's it.
I have two thank yous. One is to my wife, Karen, my partner. This was an operation of two, so I'd like to ask a big chance for Karen. And also to all our partners, all the wonderful friends that have supported this opportunity. And I'd like to ask Louis Foreman to, in a way, represent them as a main partner, basically, explaining what you saw in this opportunity, why it was important to support.
Okay, well, I wasn't prepared for this, but thank you, Carlos. First off, when Carlos came to me with this idea of bringing a thought-provoking conversation to Charlotte, it didn't take very long for me to say yes. Innovation is a subject that's near and dear to myself and to everyone that I work with, because it's what makes things possible. And we firmly believe that everyone has great ideas. Everyone wants to find ways to make the world a better place to live, but without execution, without action, without surrounding yourselves with the right people, it never happens. And so we're just honored to be involved with this event this evening, and humbled by the fact that Richard would join us here in Charlotte and stir up some thoughts, make us question why things are being done, and hopefully, as a result of this, we all make the world a better place to live. So, Richard, thank you for joining us this evening.